Hello sports fans, we have another video to do. I wasn't planning on doing this one initially, but I kind of felt like maybe I ought to. So here we are. I'm hoping this doesn't turn into a 2-hour behemoth like the MiG-21 video did, but it might. I'm not an expert in the P-40. I did grow up playing a lot of World War II sims, but the P-40 never really captured my attention that much. With that said, this is a Merlin engine P-40, and at least sim-wise, I do have a bit of experience with things with Merlin engines in them. Obviously, in real life, I have no experience with aircraft with Merlin engines in them, but you don't need real-life experience with the engine to find documentation for it or find accounts of how it runs, how it works, how it actually operates in service. So I'm just gonna roll with it today. I have got a copy of both the erection and maintenance manual for the P-40N, as well as the pilot's operating handbook for the P-40 series in general, mostly sort of catering towards the later P-40s with the redesigned nose. And it has numbers in it for both the Allison and Merlin engined later P-40 variants, as the US Army Air Force refitted the Allison into a lot of its P-40s, particularly on home service. So this is the, as you may have guessed, iniBuilds P-40F. This just released like, I don't know, about a week ago. And it seemed to be relatively highly anticipated. I mean, it's another warbird. It's a warbird that we had a P-40B, but you know, we didn't have the sort of more iconic later variants, I guess. And it is a really underappreciated aircraft. The P-40 never gets the love that it's due, probably because it's not quite as pretty as a Spitfire, but also because a lot of its best work was done in theaters that don't get a lot of attention. The P-40 was one of the aircraft that Australia's best aces got their kills on, particularly Killer Caldwell. I think he got most of his early kills in a P-40. So it is a very historically significant aircraft in the Pacific, in the China, Burma, India theater, and in North Africa, and even on the Eastern Front, as the Soviets received P-40s as part of Lend-Lease and used them reasonably extensively, although I don't believe they ever liked it as much as they liked the P-39, another very underappreciated aircraft in the West. So like I said, I've got a copy of the POH. I haven't read through it in detail. It's rather short. To be fair, there isn't a lot of detail to go through. I just haven't had time to sit down and go through the whole thing, but I have skimmed through the relevant sections and jotted down some numbers. So I'm not going into this blind, but I will tell you now that when I did go into this blind when I first flew it the other day, even then I knew that I was going to end up with a list. Like I said, I didn't plan on making a video. However, I didn't plan on making a forums post either. Let's have a brief discussion about that. The MSFS community seems to have adopted a policy of absolutely no negativity ever, and then redefined negativity to mean any sort of criticism of an issue, whether it's valid or not. And so from my limited time reading the forums, and definitely not posting, I don't even have an account there for this reason, any valid concerns that were brought up about an aircraft's flight modeling or something that, you know, wasn't quite as it should have been, were poo-pooed away by the hive mind, as it were. Valid concerns were seen as unfair criticism or victimizing developers. It's okay to do it when it's a SOBO, apparently, but if it's a third party, you're not allowed to point out any flaws for some reason. So that's the context for this. Maybe all of this would have been better summed up in a forum post. I'm sure iniBuilds would like to know about any potential issues with their aircraft, but I'm not venturing onto the MSFS forums and opening myself up to abuse by people who need to go outside and touch some grass. With that said, I'm sure I'm going to make a bunch of new friends with this video anyway. So, why am I making this video if I just said I didn't want to? Well, I'm making this video because, like with the MiG-21, I had a bit of a peruse around out of my own desire to know more about the aircraft as it's modeled in the sim and kind of get a feel for it. Decide whether I wanted to spend my money or not, which I obviously have, and we'll talk about that later. But for the most part, I find that MSFS reviews, and I use that term loosely to be honest, tend to gloss over a lot of things. They tend to be overly generous in presuming that something is working as intended or that something will get fixed later in a sim where very frequently third-party products see one patch after release if they're lucky. Now, iniBuilds seem to support their stuff quite well. There was a patch for this like literally a day or two after release that fixed a major issue I identified during flight testing, which every review I watched didn't even bring up, by the way. So that's a good start. iniBuilds have a pretty good reputation as far as I'm aware. They've made some previous stuff for the sim, quite a bit of scenery, some really nice stuff actually, and also a couple of the 40th anniversary aircraft, which have just been good across the board, which kind of took everyone off guard, I think. A lot of us expected the 40th anniversary stuff to be pretty, you know, in need of further improvement, but quite a lot of it's good just out of the box. So anyway, these guys don't seem to be the fly-by-night kind of developer, which is what kind of gives me hope for this thing, and suggests that there's potential in the future. However, as I was saying, the reviews I did watch did not really put the aircraft through its paces. And when I say they didn't put the aircraft through its paces, I don't mean they didn't spend an hour making sure that numbers lined up and doing every single flight testing maneuver, checking for flutter, all that stuff, no stick wraps, like, whatever, you know? Not like you can do that properly in MSFS anyway. But the aircraft was flown through a couple of very sedate, very by-the-books aerobatic maneuvers. There was very little mixing or blending of controls. There was no real examination of its behavior around the edge of the envelope besides a power on and power off stall. If that was even done, a lot of reviews won't even do very much in the way of checking stall or spin behavior. A couple of them do, thankfully. And then a lot of other topics were glossed over, like ground handling, engine behavior, so on and so forth. Also, I found within the MSFS community, there tends to be a lot of concession given to flight modeling and ground handling in particular, which is always blamed on Asobo, despite the fact it's nothing to do with them. And then an overly obsessive focus on systems, even if the most important system in the aircraft, its powertrain, is not functioning properly. So, before I ramble for another hour, let's get into the cockpit. Oh, before I do actually, let's talk about the visuals and the sounds. The aircraft looks pretty nice from the outside and inside. I wouldn't say it's the best looking aircraft, but it's certainly far from the worst. Look, you can see right here, it looks good, right? It looks good. There have been a few issues brought up with some of the liveries, I think. So for example, one review I watched showed that with the bare metal livery, the number on the wings is incorrectly overlaid on the ammunition feed cover. And so when you have the hatch open for the ammunition feed, it clips through it. Graphical issue, whatever, I'm sure it'll be fixed. I'm not going to obsess over issues with decal placement or anything like that. The visuals are good enough at the moment. You may have noticed, in fact, from the little pre-flight panning camera here that it appears to be backface culling the instruments from outside the cockpit. I haven't checked if that's just this camera view that's somehow triggering that, or if that's actually a thing. You can see it right there. Whatever, it's not a big deal at the moment. There are much bigger problems. So it looks good. It sounds all right. The sound looping, I feel, could be done a little better, and I'm pretty sure iniBuilds either have already patched that in the last update, which I haven't checked yet, so this is going to be a discovery flight for me as well as you guys. I don't know if they've already done it. I think I saw something in the patch notes about it, or perhaps they're going to work more on it in the future. Either way, that is good news, because the looping was really the main issue I had with the sounds. In terms of like the sound quality, the sound samples themselves, they're all right. They're not bad. Okay, let's get into the aircraft. So, a couple things to get out of the way. First of all, let's get my camera position a little more comfortable. I'm not going to be doing a checklist. I don't care. You can say study sim or full fidelity or whatever you like as much as you want. This aircraft isn't, by the way. It doesn't matter. Like, if you know roughly how to start a Western warbird, you can get into more or less any of them and get them started with a few minutes of poking around the cockpit and trial and error. So I'm not going to go through a checklist. It doesn't matter. It's not a, air quotes, study sim, which is a ridiculous marketing term. It's not a study sim aircraft. The basic functions are clickable. This hides the EFB. We'll do that in a little while, a couple of minutes. Breakers, not clickable. I doubt the failures are modeled. You're not going to need those. Cockpit heating is just flavor. You're not really going to need it. This is presumably weapons or comms stuff. I'm not entirely sure which. I'm not super familiar with the P-40, like I said. This would be comms. This is all comms stuff. I recognize it from the DC-3. And somewhere down here would be probably some sort of radio nav or something. I don't care. Like, this stuff is nice if it's clickable, but it's not a big deal. We're going to open the cockpit while we're at it. We do have some placards here, which are, in fact, legible, which is always nice. The landing gear system on the P-40 is quite bizarre, in my opinion. But it doesn't matter, because we can just use our gear bind, whatever. Okay. We do have some limitations there as well. Cockpit overview, not going to do it, don't care. The cockpit is a P-40 cockpit. It's correct for a P-40. That's all that I'm going to cover here. This isn't an introduction to the aircraft. We're not trying to learn the plane. We're talking about things this module does well and things this module does poorly. So, EFB, it's nice to have. However, having an EFB, and this connects with something we're going to see once we start taxiing, having an EFB, I would very much like to have the option to toggle a free-castering tail wheel. Now, as I understand it, some devs are still in the camp that it can't be done, it's impossible, which is empirically false. It is literally changing one number in the flight model config. One number, I've done it myself, it's not hard. The more likely reason, the reason that most of the more honest developers seem to stick with, including, I believe, ini have said this, is that they don't want to alienate Xbox customers because the Xbox players have no real way of handling a free-castering tailwheel aircraft, particularly a high-powered warbird, which is going to want to do some unseemly things when you apply throttle. Fair enough. That is understandable. However, I would like to have the option either as a clickable function somewhere in the cockpit or on an EFB where the aircraft has one like this or like the Flying Iron warbirds. There really ought to be an option for a free-castering tailwheel. It is not difficult to implement. If I can do it with my zero coding ability, I'm sure the developers can do it in about 5 seconds. The only other concern becomes, besides having the tailwheel simply freecaster, which, like I said, is one number in a config file for the contact point. It's 0.0, and it's an angular number. It's usually in the range of 60 to 90 degrees. If you change it to 180, boom, freecastering, completely disconnected from the rudder, easy. The only other thing that really factors into that, besides how the prop interacts with the tail, is the brakes. You know what? Let's cover ground handling now. it is widely stated that MSFS ground handling is not very good or has certain quirks. I see this repeated in every single review I have watched from every single reviewer. I have seen it repeated by every single third-party dev. Well, no, that's wrong. Most third-party devs, I hear it repeated all the time in other communities. I see it on the forums when I go there. Everyone is saying that, oh, MSFS just is the way it is when it comes to ground handling. This is absolute garbage. It is an excuse. If that's just how MSFS is, then I would love to know how Black Box got the Islander and the Tri-Islander to behave so realistically on the ground. I would love to know how FlySimware got the Cessna 414 to behave so realistically on the ground. Those two aircraft handle on the ground like a real fucking aircraft. I'm sorry if anyone here is offended by language. Deal with it. You're going to hear more of it as this video continues and my blood pressure goes up. It is not that difficult to implement. I've yet to find the specific numbers to get the braking force and wheel friction to feel good myself, but I know it can be done because, like I just said, I've just named 2 devs that did it. There are other ones too. Jimenez's adjustment for the Airplane Heaven 40th Anniversary DC3, and also CCM's add-on for that. You can have that aircraft set up to free caster, and you can steer it with the toe brakes without the typical, air quotes, typical MSFS behavior of tapping a toe brake to try and pivot the aircraft around it. The aircraft slowly and unwillingly pivots in that direction and then stops and then won't move. That is claimed to be MSFS. That is not MSFS. That is lazy devs not setting up the ground friction and braking force properly, because like I said, Black Box and FlySimware have both done it. Jimenez has done it. CCM has done it. It's not hard, dude. It's not hard. And that's not just something that benefits free castering aircraft. Even aircraft that are using, you know, rudder connected steering like this does, like pretty much everything else in the sim does, there's no reason not to do it on those. The Islander, Tri-Islander, and the Cessna 414 all have nose wheel steering. And yet, if you don't want to actively use the nose wheel steering, you can steer them with toe braking differentially as you would with a free castering aircraft. And in that case, the nose wheel will free caster. Like, there's no reason not to adjust it. It makes the aircraft feel much better on the ground. It makes it feel more realistic. It makes aircraft less prone to riding up on their like tailwheel aircraft, riding up on their mains and bumping their nose when you just tap the brakes, not even stand on them, but tap them at low speeds. Often the aircraft will lift its tail and drop suddenly. That's because the braking force and the wheel friction are set too high. Okay, so that would be a nice option to have somewhere. I'm not going to go through, ooh, this option, like, I don't care, dude. I don't care. I don't use the EFB. But I will talk about persistence. I don't know if you guys can see this. The sun's making this awkward. But we have a maintenance table here. We can use this to open and close inspection hatches, which is a nice feature. It's a bit of visual eye candy. It doesn't really do anything, but, you know, having the option for screenshots or whatever is nice. Spark plug wear, yeah, okay, that looks reasonable. Tire wear, yeah, sure, because I've been a bit heavy on the brakes. Hydraulic fluid, sure. Engine oil, I'm going to fill that up and replace the tires now, but I did some poking around, and while I was not able to find 100% solid academically sourced numbers for the Merlin's typical oil consumption, in the 10 seconds I spent Googling it, I was able to find 2 different figures, one for a typical fighter Merlin of the mid to late war period, and one for the Lancaster's Merlin 31, which gave a figure of 3 to 10 gallons per hour. Was it per hour? I wish I'd written it down. This is the one number I didn't write down. I think it was 3 to 10 gallons per hour for the Lancaster, and it was listed as somewhere between 6 and 20 for a fighter Merlin, which obviously is a bit more powerful, as the bomber engines were derated for better endurance and better serviceability. So 6 to 10 gallons per hour. The oil tank on this thing is 87.5 US gallons from memory. And yet I've had people expressing surprise that they went through 10% of their total oil on the aircraft in half an hour of flying. I have flown this thing in total for probably about half an hour or less, and as you saw, I'd taken a significant chunk out of my oil. This thing's probably burning oil too fast. Is it a big deal? Not really. If anything, I suspect iniBuilds deliberately did that in order to give people something to just do with the EFB, because typically, like, this aircraft doesn't have amazing endurance, and even if we could fit external drop tanks to it, most people aren't going to be flying a P-40 for 4-hour stretches. They're going to fly it for 20 minutes, half an hour, maybe an hour, and some people might only fly it every other week or every other month, so having an exaggerated oil loss rate is reasonable. If you want people to have a little EFB toy to play with, that's fine. You know, might not be 100% correctly modeled, but it's fine. Doesn't really hurt anything. That's really the only thing I wanted to bring up with EFB. Maintenance and persistence, that is a new option that was just added in the update then. And then we have the civilian military option. I roll with the military option because I'm flying a warbird, because it is a warbird. And that will do us for the EFB. Gun sight. It is missing its reflector glass, or collimator glass, I should say, which is kind of an important part of the gun sight. Doesn't work without it. This isn't a Hawker Tempest or Sea Fury, where it uses the armored windscreen for that purpose. It needs a separate glass, which is not present here. I believe this type of gun sight also integrated a slip ball into it, like most US reflector gun sights, but I could be wrong on that, so I'm not going to say that that is strictly wrong or right, because I do not know. Okay, like I said, I'm not going to checklist this. If I do the startup out of order, it isn't going to matter anyway, because the aircraft will still start. And all of the issues I'm going to bring up, I have confirmed with a hot started aircraft, which is presumably already set up correctly. So we are going to make sure we actually have some fuel on. We're going to go rear tank first. Actually, we might go reserve, then go rear. We'll start on reserve and go to rear. I think that's usually what you would do in this. We're going to start with rear first because the default CG of the aircraft is like right on the rear limit. So I don't want to burn off the front wing tank and make that problem worse, especially with some of what we're going to discuss once we are in the air. I'm going to make sure my mixture is full rich. I'm going to get the RPM fully forward. I'm going to come down here. Battery can go on. Fuel pump is already on. I'm not sure if that's state saved and I forgot to turn it off last time, or if it just defaults to the on position. Interesting. I'm going to get the UV lights cranked up a little just because I like having that on. And also if we shadow the cockpit, it should make the gauges a little more visible on YouTube compression. Okay, fuel primer. Let's give that 2, 3, 4, 5. Good enough. Running lights. Fuel gauge lights. Not sure exactly how the settings on that work. Doesn't really matter. We're going to leave the landing light off. It's daylight. We'll get the pitot heater running now, although normally I'd wait a little longer to turn that on. Rad is fully open. We can't do anything with the prop controls. So the way that the Curtis Electric prop works is that it has a switch for automatic and manual. In automatic mode, it functions as a normal constant speed propeller. Sorry, that's the wrong lever. Big brain. It uses the prop RPM lever to regulate the RPM of the prop. Straightforward, like any other constant speed warbird. The manual mode has a decrease and increase RPM position on the switch. And in that, it functions as a fixed pitch prop until you increase or decrease the RPM. I believe a couple of other warbirds had similar systems. I think the D520 has one as well. Not relevant for the purposes of this test, because according to the switch position, it should be in auto, so it should behave the same way it would on any other constant speed equipped aircraft, and it's not clickable, so we can't do anything with it anyway. So we're now going to put the mags on, and crack the throttle a little, and get the starter going. It catches pretty easily, which is true of not all, but most aircraft in MSFS. Could maybe be a little more fussy about startup, but I'm not going to hold that against it. This has been brought up by other people, but the heat haze is annoying, particularly on the ground, but even in the air it obscures your vision out of the side lights. I don't think it's worth having. The way it's rendered isn't even realistic, so even for realism purposes it's not worth having it. I honestly do not think that we need that heat haze. However, I think I did see some little flames licking out of the exhaust for a few moments there after startup, which is a nice little touch. The prop, it's a little bit rolling shutter effect, because everyone, for some reason, models props as if they're looking at them through a camera instead of human eyeballs. It's not the worst I've seen, though. It's pretty far from the worst I've seen, so I won't hold that against them. Okay, so we're idling at roughly the right RPM. Our oil pressure that we are looking for is no higher than 120 psi once the engine's up to speed, and we want it 60 to 70 degrees, which it is. So we'll run the engine up to about 1400. I'm not going to do a full run-up check with the mags and make sure the prop's dropping the RPM properly and everything, because you'll see why in a minute. Oil pressure is well and truly below 120, so we're happy with that. Okay, all is good there. Now, let's get the aircraft rolling. Get rid of the parking brake. And enjoy the wonders of completely unadjusted stock MSFS ground handling, which any dev could adjust to be more realistic in about 5 seconds of tweaking a config file. I'm totally unfamiliar with this airport. We're out in the Midwest, kind of near Topeka, Kansas. I chose this area just because it's relatively flat and featureless, so we shouldn't have too much interference weather-wise on the aircraft's performance. I am running live weather. I was debating just running, like, laboratory testing kind of conditions, so ISA, temperature and pressure, no clouds, nothing, but I don't think there's much point, to be honest. It doesn't matter that much. I do normally run FS Realistic these days, however I have it turned off at the moment, so what you're seeing is purely default aircraft and sim behaviour. I could do a little taxiing around on the grass just to demonstrate what I mean about the ground handling, particularly the braking force and wheel friction. Sorry about the fidgeting here, my seat's dropping out from under me. But look, I don't think it's needed. I think it's common knowledge what the hallmarks of stock MSFS ground handling are, but the issue is misattribution of whose fault it is. Or the assumption that it can't be changed when it's literally a handful of numbers in a text editable file that anyone can fix once they know what numbers to look for. Okay, takeoff in the P-40 does not call for flap. flap is optional. The pilot's operating handbook says, at the end of the takeoff procedure, if you chose to use flap, make sure not to retract below 500 feet. However, flaps are not typically used for takeoff in any single-seat fighter of World War II, at least the land-based ones. Naval ones, they probably were, I don't know. But land-based fighters almost never used flaps to take off during the war, and specific aircraft like the Spitfire, you would not use the flaps for any purpose except landing. So, we're going to do a flapless takeoff in the P-40 today, as you generally would. Takeoff settings for the Merlin engine P-40 is maximum of 54 inches manifold pressure, recommended of 48, and 3,000 RPM. 3,000 RPM is your max revs for a Merlin, so that's takeoff, or like max takeoff, that's war emergency power, that's mill power, like everything tops out at 3,000 on a Merlin. So, we are full forward on the RPM. You can hear my lever hitting the stop there. We're going to, I'm going to go to auto rich. I'm not actually sure what the mixture procedure is for the P-40, to be honest. But it doesn't matter that much for the purposes of our testing. Okay, let's go ahead and give us some beans. Of course, because the tail wheel is coupled to the rudder, the aircraft is tracking completely straight. Look at the revs. Look at the revs. 2,300 revs. Sorry, that was me getting heavy-footed, and the aircraft is trying to ride up on its right wheel for some reason, probably because I just, you know, got clumsy there. If I give the stick a little forward pressure, the nose bunts forward dangerously, so we're going to take off a little bit 3-point, which you're not supposed to do, but I don't want to strike the prop. Okay, I'm still at my takeoff power of 48 inches, well, 46. 48 inches manifold pressure, right? 48 inches manifold pressure. Look at the revs. I'm still full forward on the revs. It's now just climbing past 2,600 as I pick up speed in the air. This is not correct. Now, I heard secondhand, I'm going to come off the power here, we want 35 inches, 2,500 revs. Well, good thing we want 2,500 revs, because that means we basically don't have to change anything with the RPM lever, because it's not behaving correctly. So, I heard secondhand through a review of this aircraft that apparently iniBuilds stated the Merlin, and one would presume the Curtiss Electric prop that is mated to it, are modelled completely realistically. They are empirically correct, backed up by a P-40 rated pilot. Now, a couple things here. First of all, I will be very surprised if anyone can find a Warbird rated pilot who has actually sat down with MSFS at length and tested the aircraft in the sim. I challenge you to find that, because I can already tell you that some other devs who have used pilot endorsements to say that their stuff's modeled correctly were referring specifically to pilots who are known to have not played any consumer level sims. So yeah. And having a P-40 rated pilot sit down for 5 minutes and muck about in the sim is kind of not the same as having a P-40 rated pilot test the thing in detail when they're already experienced with the sim, and so they know all its quirks. And they've kind of got past that initial phase of decoupling, where they're struggling to figure out the visual and audio cues because their arse is not actually in the seat. We're still, by the way, we're still full forward, and we're just holding about 2,600 RPM. So, this is wrong. I would not have taken this aircraft off in real life. The moment I saw that RPM capped off at 2,300, with 48 inches of manifold pressure, I would not take this aircraft off. Simple as that. I would taxi back to parking area and shut it down, and I would immediately have somebody look at the prop. I don't know what they've done with the constant speed unit, but I can tell you that's not how the constant speed unit's supposed to work. The fact that it was gaining revs at the same RPM lever setting as we built speed, yeah, I mean, to a degree it should be doing that mostly in things like power dives when it can't keep up. But yeah, no, takeoff revs are 3,000. Like, you don't take off if it's not making 3,000 RPM. You just don't. Okay, I think we've climbed reasonably high enough. Let's execute a turn here. You can see I'm feeding rudder into this. I'm feeding in way more than I need to. So, one thing to note, I had to give very little rudder input to the aircraft on the takeoff roll. You may have noticed I nearly veered off the right of the runway because my reptile brain told me, this is a Merlin engine, you need to give it right rudder on takeoff. So I did without thinking about it, and the aircraft veered off the runway. Why is that? Well, that's because this aircraft will track almost perfectly straight down the runway with zero rudder input. Is that a concession to the Xbox gamers again? I don't know. If it is, give us an option in the EFB for actual realistic prop physics, please, iniBuilds. I mean, maybe it's a concession to Xbox players, maybe they just genuinely are still getting their heads around how to do prop aircraft, I don't know. Now we're at 3,000 revs. Now we're at 3,000 revs, as we pass 200 miles an hour in cruise. Okay, so we want to drop back to about 2650, we'll call it. Which is your sort of maximum continuous cruise in a Merlin is always 2650. And we'll give her about 35 inches. Sorry, 38 inches manifold pressure. The numbers are about 2 to 3 inches higher for the Merlin than for the Allison. That's the main difference in engine setting. Okay, well, this doesn't look too bad, right? Aside from the prop not working how it's supposed to work, and the takeoff physics not working how they're supposed to work, and the ground handling not working how it's supposed to work, although at least we understand why. It's not too bad, right? Well, I have not touched the rudder trim at all. I have not touched it once. I'm constantly trimming in pitch, and the pitch trim in this is extremely slow. I have to hold it for several seconds to get any response out of it. You can hear me just clicking away, because that's what I'm used to doing from DCS and IL2, and it is doing absolutely nothing. I've got to hold it. But hey, this isn't too bad, right? Look, we're sitting about 230, 240 miles an hour, at pretty close to standard cruise settings, you know, max continuous cruise settings for Merlin. This is okay. Well, we're going to do a couple things. So, we're going to try and hold the aircraft more or less level, and what I want you to do is look at my rudder pedals and look at the slip ball as I cut power. I am getting a bit sloppy with my pitch, but that is neither here nor there because that is not what we're looking at. Let's go for emergency. Idle. War emergency. Are you getting the point yet? There is absolutely no effect on the aircraft's flight from changes in power. There is no roll being caused by the torque of the prop and the engine itself. There is no yaw being caused by the prop slipstream hitting the tail of the aircraft, which is also the reason it was tracking straight on takeoff. It's behaving like a jet. In fact, even a jet, to a minuscule degree, will exhibit a yawing moment in certain situations. Oh, sorry, correction. Rolling moment in certain situations, because jets experience things like gyroscopic effects because of the rotation of the engine. Rotation of the turbine, even. Sorry, I just woke up before starting this video. So, we have a prop aircraft, a high-powered World War II prop aircraft, that is not exhibiting the most basic and fundamental behaviours of a prop-driven aircraft. Now, far be it from me to start beef in the MSFS community like I have with every other community I get into, but it strikes me as a bit... I don't want to use too strong a word here. I'm not going to say that people are, like, deliberately doing this, because I don't really think they are. I think... Well... Okay, let's just be upfront about it. A lot of the reviews I've watched, not just of this aircraft, but of MSFS stuff in general, the reviewers will go out of their way to prostrate themselves before the devs and apologize in advance for any criticism, no matter how valid. Even I was doing it in that MiG-21 video. It's like the developers are precious little flowers, and if we say anything bad will hurt their feelings, and they'll run away and we'll never get them back. Like, having spent enough time seeing how flight sim devs... in general, some of them are really good and down-to-earth people, but look, let's be real here. Flight sim development takes a certain kind of person with a certain type of personality, and a lot of them have egos the size of small planets. So I can kind of see how that behavior is originated, I guess, but either way, it's not healthy, and it's not constructive, and it is not going to help people make wise decisions about what they should spend their money on if they're looking for a particular experience. If you want something that looks like a P-40 and sounds like a P-40, and in the future may well become a really good P-40, like I said, I think this thing does have potential, and we'll go more into that as the video continues, then yeah, sure, this is worth your money. It's cheap, like really cheap, which is why it's not full fidelity. I'm still running at ground settings, by the way, for the engine, so let's just chuck it up there. Or not for the engine, for the radiator, sorry, cowl flaps. So yeah, like, it's cheap, but it's not cheap enough that I'm going to give a pass to blatant flight model issues. Like, the ravioli is cheaper. The, God, what is it? This is why it's called the ravioli. It's because nobody can remember its actual name. The Caproni Vizzola. That's like not even $10, last I checked. So yeah, like, it's cheap, but it's not cheap enough that you can say, oh, well, it's cheap, so stop complaining. Yeah, like, the MSFS community, even the more sort of upstanding and honest members of it will go out of their way to avoid calling things as they are, I've noticed. So things are gently implied or hinted at, if they're brought up at all. Or it's a case of, oh, well, this looks wrong, but I don't know the real aircraft, so this might be correct. Well, if only there was a wonderful resource that would tell you that in 3 seconds, called a Pilot's Operating Handbook, just for thought. My first flight in this thing, I could tell when it ran up to 2300 revs at, past 50 inches of manifold pressure, because I gave it all the beans, the first flight I did in it. I knew that something was gravely wrong with the prop modeling. Like, I have spent enough time reading over Pilot's Operating Handbooks for Merlin engine aircraft. I've spent enough time playing other sims that have Merlin engine aircraft in them that are known to model them well. Like, this stuff isn't esoteric knowledge that's impossible for laymen to get. It's called just doing a little research. So there's a lot of leeway given to devs. There's a lot of things that are kind of passed over or minimized in reviews. Something becomes, oh, it's just a minor problem. Or, oh, it might be a problem for you. Like, I'm not about that. I'm about saying how I think things really are. So, with that out of the way, let's discuss how this thing handles in the air. How does it roll? Not badly. Roll rate, feels okay. I don't know what the actual proper roll rate of the P-40 at 250 miles an hour is for full stick deflection, but comparing it with the other available warbirds in the sim, that feels about right. So if they're all about right, then we can say this is about right. Whatever, it's a topic for another person. So roll feels okay in itself. There's a bit of inertia there. As you can see, the aircraft does exhibit a reasonable amount of adverse yaw, which I would expect. Pitch. This is... Oh, they haven't fixed it! I was told that was fixed. Okay. That was less than half stick deflection, by the way. I have no curves set up. This is a Verpal Warbird base with a Verpal Constellation Alpha on top of it. No curves. Default. Everything default. Look at this. Okay, they've improved that aspect, but they haven't fixed it. And this is at 250 miles an hour. This is dogfighting speed. Boom! There we go. There it is. There it is. Okay, so you want to tell me you found no major problems with the flight handling during testing. This isn't even at the devs, right? This is at people reviewing the aircraft who say, "Oh yeah, the flight handling feels about right. No major no major issues. No major issues." Look. If that was a full stick forward bunt, then sure. Like, if I went full stick forwards immediately, I could believe the aircraft doing some sort of nasty little tuck like that. But the effect is so severe, I think this is what caused Avangel to flip backside over front side in her first attempt at taking off during her video. She probably tried to raise the tail, and the aircraft got away from her. In fact, you could almost see it doing it when I tried to raise the tail before. The trigger appears to be going more than half stick forwards. It's not even related to the suddenness of it, because if I gradually apply pressure more than half stick forwards, boom. So, this aircraft is apparently using the CFD stuff that MSFS has to validate its flight model and make it behave realistically. I'm going to say something on that, which is that CFD is a wonderful tool to augment actual data. CFD is not the be-all end-all that the flight simming community treats it like. CFD simulations are only worth as much as the data that's put into them. So if you put in incorrect parameters, or if your mesh is somehow, like if it has an error on it, whatever, it's going to give you invalid results, and there may be certain things that, because, especially with MSFS, because the CFD is running effectively in real time, it's grossly simplified. There are going to be certain effects that would appear in more intensive, like industry-level CFD, that are not going to appear in-game dynamically, or they're going to appear wrong. So CFD is a nice tool to have to add to the way the aircraft flies and to give it more of that feeling of being alive in the air. It's not the only thing you want to base your flight model on. And there are certain behaviors that aircraft exhibit that will not appear just with CFD-based flight modeling in MSFS, despite the fact that those aircraft are well known to exhibit that behavior in real life. So that sudden nose forward bunt, I mean, maybe, but to me, like, I had that happen. Maybe they fixed it at small stick deflections, and at large ones it's still correct. I can kind of see that, I guess. But that used to occur from, like, that. So you would go to, like, raise the tail on takeoff, and it would bunt forwards and prop strike. You would go to make a slight adjustment forwards, or you'd bump your stick slightly, and the aircraft would bunt forward and try and flip on its back. Let's see if I can get it to actually turn turtle here. I didn't hold it. I guess you gotta hold it to do that now. They've improved it. So, before the update, doing that used to actually turn the aircraft beyond 90 degrees nose down, even just from a brief impulse on the stick. In pitch in general, it is extremely twitchy. So, again, look at the stick deflections compared to what the aircraft's doing. So, certain warbirds in particular are known to be light in pitch. I do not know about the P-40, because I haven't read enough from pilots that flew it during the war. However, I know the Spitfire was notorious for being twitchy in pitch, and then not very sensitive in roll, and that is generally how the Spitfire gets simulated in pretty much every game ever. There is something to be said for the fact that there is a long stick extension in the real aircraft, and I'm using a short throw sort of... like, I don't have a stick extension at all, and I've got this thing sitting on my desk, so I don't have that extra lever arm. But, while there is something to be said for that, you know, it's only a part of the issue. Again, roll feels good. Like, roll feels really, really good. Pitch is too twitchy, and I can tell you why. I can actually tell you why. If you go into the flight model config file, in the top couple of lines is your moments of inertia on each axis. The pitch moment of inertia for an empty weight aircraft is set for this at 1,717. For a bit of perspective, every other warbird in the sim that I own, I didn't check the big radials P-40 to be fair, but like all of the Flying Iron stuff, the Milviz F4U, all of it falls into the range of 5,000 to 7,000. Like the Spitfire's 5,200 or something, and the F6F is 7,000 and something. And this is 1,717. And it shows. It shows. It acts like it is like it's behaving like it has no weight. It's acting like it's an ultralight. And it's because, oh, there we go again. It's because the pitch moment of inertia is nowhere near enough an aircraft of this size and weight. And even if you mathematically derive that number, which I don't think they did, because I've seen other devs comment in that they mathematically derived the much larger numbers I've seen, even if you mathematically derive that, well, good for you. There's a reason why sim development flight modeling is considered a black art even amongst aeronautical engineers. It's because it's difficult to do, and if you plug in real-life numbers, it will not necessarily give you a real-life approximate result. You have to tweak things and adjust things because the sim is not real-life and there are interactions within the code that you can't predict, as well as real-life factors that are just inherent to the aircraft, which the sim cannot model very easily, like, for instance, the physical strength of the pilot, the forces added by the lever arm of the stick, by the friction on the cables as they run through pulleys and cranks, the air loading on the control surfaces, although that is something you can change in the flight model config in MSFS, and a lot of devs just don't, so that may well be part of the problem here. I haven't checked that far into the flight model yet. Like, there is stuff that is at play here that is very much like one value in a line of code in a text editable file. Like, I could fix this right now. I won't, because then that would defeat the purpose of making this video, but I could fix this right now. But a lot of the issues with MSFS flight models, not just this one, but with MSFS flight models in particular, and especially the third-party stuff, is because the devs either don't understand what something does, or they somehow like put in a value that just doesn't line up with the sim's so-called reality, or they just can't be asked and find it easy to blame a Sobo. If you look at a really well-done, in-depth flight model from somebody that knows what all the values do and what everything is supposed to be set to, you will find that some of the aircraft in this sim handle almost identically to how they handle in real life. I have very little real-life flying time, and I've only flown 2 aircraft myself. However, I own a MSFS module of the aircraft I first learnt to fly on, and even though it's using a common shared flight model between 2 variants with slightly different wing geometry, so the stall speeds are slightly off and the stall behavior is slightly too aggressive for the aircraft I learned to fly on in-game. In all other respects, it behaves pretty much exactly as a real aircraft did. So, it's not the sim and it's not a Sobo. No matter how much people repeat that, it's not the sim and it's not a Sobo. It never was. Anyway, so that's pitch. Our pitch is, to put it lightly, munted. Our roll is good. Our yaw... yeah. Okay, actually, let's... Again, I haven't touched the rudder trim, by the way. In a, what is this? Probably 1300 horsepower. Aircraft. You know, just throwing that one out there. Haven't touched the rudder trim, haven't had to. Despite speed and power changes both. So we're going to go ahead and full right rudder. So the good news is the secondary effect of rudder, namely induced roll, is really well modelled. In a lot of aircraft in MSFS, it is not modelled very well at all, and so you can boot the rudder fully to one side and the aircraft will maybe consider banking to that side. This is why people claim the base game turbulence is bugged, and it makes the aircraft only see, like, fishtail side to side, and there's, like, no pitch or roll induced by turbulence. Again, it's not MSFS, it's not a Sobo, it's the actual aircraft's flight model not having sufficient coupling between roll and yaw axes, which the developers of the aircraft in question could fix with literally one number being changed. This is good. This is good. You might get, like, if you get really rapid turbulence, you could still see how that would happen, I guess. Some aircraft I've flown in the sim will immediately begin to drop the wing, but you would normally get a slight delay. So I feel like that's... it's good. It could maybe be increased a little, or like the lag time could be adjusted or something, but look, it's close enough. And it's there, which is good, because in some aircraft it isn't. Okay, while we're talking about secondary effects of flight controls, this thing is a nightmare to trim to fly level hands off because it's so sensitive in pitch, but we will try it. Of course, we're burning off fuel, so that's going to adjust our CG a bit. We are getting a slight left roll, which is now gone, so that was probably the weather doing it, not the torque. Look, close enough. Close enough. I'm going to increase power to war emergency. Okay, she's slightly climbing, but not much. Let's now cut to idle. My nose is still going up. Now it's dropping. Slowly. Very slowly. Okay. So this is going to become really relevant when we go to land. This aircraft's drag is, like, comically low. Let's cut power again to idle. And let's just, like, point the nose up. Let's call it a 2,000 foot per minute climb. We're at idle, by the way. Idle in a 2,000 foot per minute climb. Okay, now we're starting to drop off, and this will go nicely into a power off stall. There's 90 miles an hour, which is the listed clean stall speed. On average, P-40s, you know, it's going to vary from aircraft to aircraft. There's 85-ish. She's slowly going, and there she goes. That was very sedate because I was kind of nursing it, but it's stalling maybe a touch too slow, which couples into the other problem which I was alluding to in a bit. I'm about to detail, but so let's do another. Let's stall it a bit more aggressively, if we can. Oh. Oh. Are we going to call that 60? 60, 70 miles an hour? That's a bit slow. Okay, well, you know what? While we're up here, while we're doing this... Gear and flaps. Massive ballooning effect as the flaps come out, by the way. Absolutely gigantic ballooning effect as the flaps come out. Which I'm not sure about. I did look in the POH. It doesn't actually say what effect the flaps have on the nose position of the aircraft. And I'm not an aeronautical engineer myself, so I can't theorize confidently. She's stalling too slow. Should be 84 miles an hour, give or take, full dirty landing configuration, and 90 clean. Which I think she was actually doing before the update, so I don't know if they've changed that, or something else has interacted with it, or what, but she's stalling too slow now. So yeah, effects of the flaps going out, the nose balloons enormously. It'll pick up like 5 degrees of pitch, maybe more, as the flaps come fully out. It's been said, we'll just lower them in stages. Sure, but, you know... My frame of reference for warbirds is usually the Spitfire. In the Spitfire, flaps coming out actually drops the nose by a couple of degrees. Like the P-40, it has split flaps, but unlike the P-40, they are either up or down, and it is a 85-degree drop, not a 45-degree drop like the P-40. So this could well be correct behavior on the P-40. I'm going to go ahead and say it. I don't know, so I'm not going to say it's wrong, but I also am not entirely convinced it's right either. Just because of how severe it is, more so than anything. We're going to actually climb a bit. And do some accelerated stalls and see if we can get it into a spin. So far, I have not been able to spin this aircraft. Not in the sense of it actually genuinely wanting to spin. I've had to force it into one and hold it into one. And as soon as I stopped holding pro spin controls, it recovered itself instantly. Pilot's Operating Handbook does forbid spins. It goes like through multiple methods of telling you spins are a bad idea, don't do them, including an outright prohibition. However, the Pilot's Operating Handbook also describes spin recovery procedures which are very standard and simple, and then in a box down the bottom of the page says that, oh, by the way, if this doesn't work, just let go of the controls and it'll recover in 2 or 3 turns, which is like, why didn't you do that in the first place? I don't know. So it seems the P-40 isn't too vicious in spins. I know that some P-40s, particularly the earlier ones, had some directional stability issues, and they lengthened the tail to try and solve that, but yeah. Look, from the way it was spoken about in the Pilot's Operating Handbook, it doesn't sound like this thing is homicidal, so I'm going to give it the benefit of the doubt. That was a nasty little gust there. Those do exist in real life, counter to the belief of the MSFS community, although there is also an issue with live weather desyncing, so it's probably a bit of column A and a bit of column B when it comes to the very abrupt and sudden side gusts that people complain about. Okay, we're going to presume we're in a dogfight, so we're going to go war emergency. And let's begin turning. This is more or less sustained. Right here, I could hold this for quite a long time. About 170 mile an hour. Not bad. Okay, let's level off, let's pick up some speed, and then let's rip the nose around like we think we're flying an F-18. We're past 3,000 revs, actually, slightly past 3,000 revs. Interesting. I'd expect overshoots and undershoots as the constant speed unit tries to keep up with what the aircraft's doing and what the pilot inputs with the lever. That is a thing, there is lag time to it. It's usually a hydraulic-driven system, so it's not instantaneous, but, well, in this case it's electric. Curtis Electric, right? But yeah, like, it's not instantaneous, which it shouldn't be modeled as. So having a bit of lag time in the RPM is good, having overshoots and undershoots is good, having it sitting consistently above redline, probably not so much. There's a bit of that rolling shutter on the prop that I spoke about. Not the worst offender, but definitely could be improved. Okay, let's go left. Yank the stick back. If you pull full stick aft, she actually just doesn't want to turn. So again, let's full stick aft. I almost feel like this is probably a bit of the pitch inertia problem, because you see that like aggressive bob and then it goes. I think that's partly pitch inertia. The fact it is breaking into a wing and then rolling over, that was me doing it by hand, but the fact it is snapping to one wing in an accelerated stall is documented P-40 behaviour and is what I'd expect from an aircraft like this anyway, even if I didn't have the pilot's operating handbook, so that's good. It's good to see. Let's pretend we don't know how to fly a plane, and that we're an average MSFS player, and let's just hold pro spin controls. Oh no, I'm in a spin. I'm going to hold full left back stick to try and unfuck the situation caused by holding full left back stick. You see it's nose down, and we're actually picking up speed. Probably because I've got the power on. Instant recovery. POH says 2 to 3 turns once you release the controls and it recovers itself. This will do it literally as soon as you release the controls. We'll get some of that altitude back. I'll just leave it in war emergency, who cares? It's not like I'm going to blow the engine. Oh, by the way, in one of the reviews I saw, it was brought up that there might be something wrong with the coolant system because the temperature's hovering at 120 degrees. Now, I can't speak to the P-40's coolant system because I didn't read about it in that much detail, even though I have the documentation for it. I just haven't had time. And to be frank, like, there are other issues with this aircraft that are much more pressing. However, it is common for a lot of warbirds to sit around 110, 120 degrees because there is a slight pressurization in the coolant system. And those of the World War II aircraft that had automatic radiators, like later Spitfires, Mustangs, BF-109s, etc., they would attempt to hold the coolant temp around 110 to 120 degrees Celsius because of that slight pressure. So you would worry if you see the coolant temp going up to 140 or 150, but 120 was optimal. If you go much below that, you're not getting as much power out of the engine as you could be. If you go above that, you're cooking it. So, I don't know if this has like some sort of automated system in conjunction with the manually set cooling gills, cowl flaps, but if it does, that would be why it's sitting at 120. If it doesn't, then maybe it's just not modeled yet, or they think it does. I don't know. Just kind of putting it out there as a thought, something to consider, something for somebody with more free time than me to look up. Alright, this should do for altitude. Well, hey, I'm going to go full right stick and cut power. And then I'm going to hold full left. Okay, if I just hold full left in what is allegedly a spin, it just starts banking left instead. I'm holding pro spin controls the whole time. I don't even need to fight this with rudder. I mean, I could. It's not going to help because I'm holding pro spin controls, but as soon as I release, it recovers. I have yet to be able to put this thing in a proper spin. Or rather have it develop an actual spin on me, rather than me force it into a spin and hold it there. Is it capable of it? Maybe. Have I experienced it myself? No. Have I tried? Yes. So yeah. I don't know what's going on with that. I'm just ignoring the recommended power settings at this point, by the way, because, like, I don't care, but using them as a benchmark for what it should be doing versus what it's actually doing is the main reason I bring them up. In normal flight, I just kind of fly by ear. There's something else that I want to show, and it's a combination of a couple of those factors that we looked at earlier. So we like our roll, right? Roll is good. In fact, let's go ahead and... let's go ahead and do something kind of approaching a barrel roll. I'm pretty bad at barrel rolls because I always overcook them on both inputs, but... so... yeah, it doesn't feel bad. That was pretty sedate. I could have given it more, but, you know, whatever. But what I want to show you is an aileron roll with a little bit of forward stick. Say you're doing an aileron roll at low altitude and you panic and go, oh shit, I didn't leave myself enough room, I'm losing altitude, like a lot of people do. Okay. Aileron roll. Oh shit, I'm losing altitude. Forward stick, there's that bump. And it kicks the aircraft out of the roll. We'll do it again in the opposite direction. And I won't look sideways this time, just so you can see reference to the horizon, or the clouds at least. So, left aileron roll, oh shit, losing altitude. Boom, up goes the nose. And out of the aircraft I've really kind of thrown around so far, that's pretty unique to the P-40 in MSFS. Okay, the final thing I really want to talk about, because I'm running out of time, I have places to be today, and I'm probably boring you all to tears, and also increasing the list of people that I'm going to end up in arguments with as I go by the minute, is we want to go land, and I have no idea where the airfield's gone, because I have not been navigating in the slightest, and it's not an easy field to spot from the air. It's over by the river somewhere, so we'll head that way and we'll look for the field, and while we're searching for the field, we can discuss what I'm about to go into, which is drag. The aircraft does not exhibit, like, a fraction of the drag I would expect from any warbird, let alone a P-40 with a honking great combined radiator, oil cooler, everything else on the chin. The P-40 is a triumph of power over aerodynamics. That's kind of the reason the P-40 exists, because the Hawk was kind of crap, and they figured by putting a big inline in front of it, they could cut some of the drag off the radial and make it actually go reasonably fast. When they did this, they found out, oh shit, no, that ain't gonna do it. And the P-40 was never an amazingly fast aircraft, although it was always a good diver. And it always retained its energy well. And turned really well, too. But this thing in MSFS exhibits very, very little drag. It makes it annoying to land, actually. It's like when the Spitfire, the Flying Iron Spitfire, first released, and you could have power cut to idle, and revs fully forwards, to try and generate as much drag off the prop as you possibly could, and yet it would just not slow down. Even holding level, let alone descending. Is that a runway? Debatable, probably not. We may have to consult the old magenta line here. This video was about flight testing the aircraft after all, not testing my navigational skills. Okay, 52k over there, so it's slight right of the nose. Should be just by the confluence of these streams. Yeah, it's like down there somewhere. Alright. I'm gonna cut to idle. Idle! Idle. Right? I'm at idle. I'm gonna go full revs forward. specified revs for landing in pilot's operating handbook is 2650, but I'm going to go full forward, right? And it's doing 2400. In fact, it's like 2450 actually. So we can't even achieve the 2650 we're supposed to be doing. We'll need to bump up the throttle some, which, to be fair, you're probably supposed to do anyway. That's why there's no throttle setting given for landing. Excuse me as I have a brain fart real time. So yeah, 2650 about there. So we're just above idle. But even if I cut to idle, and I'm in a... Let's go to a 500 foot a minute descent. In fact, no, let's not even go 500 foot a minute. Let's hold level-ish. Let's hold level-ish. And just watch. Watch how slowly the speed bleeds off. In a clean config, holding level, throttle cut completely to idle, max revs. I'm descending slightly because I'm a bit wobbly with the stick today. And we're getting pushed around a little by turbulence, but look how slowly the speed decays. This thing has a better glide ratio right now than a lot of the gliders in the sim, honestly. Like, best glide for this aircraft from memory is about 170. So let's hold 170. Well, it's going to be a little difficult now since I'm below that, but... Okay, 170 miles an hour. It's about a 700 foot per minute descent somewhere in there it wants to hold. Maybe 1,000. Now, okay, so to be fair, I haven't done the maths to figure out what this thing's glide ratio actually is in the sim at the moment. But in terms of feel, it feels like it's too much. Because, and this is coming from the drag, because it's just not losing speed. Like, it just does not lose speed in a clean config. In fact, it still has trouble losing speed in a dirty config until you get it below about, like, 150, 100-ish, at which point speed drops off precipitously, and you need to start adding power to stop the aircraft from killing itself. So, something needs adjusting there. Yeah, where's our runway? It's over there somewhere, I think. Actually, I think I see it. I'm barely adding power right now, and the aircraft's quite happily trucking along at 150 mile an hour. Once I've identified the actual runway, we will do a landing. I'm already relatively slow. No, not anymore, I'm not, because I just let the nose drop, but I'm already relatively slow, so the effect of the low drag is not going to be as severe as my usual landing procedure, where I decide, oh, there's a runway I'm going to land from, like, cruise speed, and cut everything and just try and get it down. We're not going to have the full effect of that, but you may still be able to see what I'm talking about. Okay, one of these fields is technically a runway. I don't even think it's marked. It's further over this way, I think. Go ahead and open the canopy anyway. You'd normally land with the canopy open. Any warbird that you can open the canopy in flight, not you, 109, you would, just in case you need to get out in a hurry. And also so you can lean out and see around the nose. It's my left wing, allegedly. That, probably. That right there. That's our runway. Okay. I see it now. I still haven't touched the rudder trim for the entire flight, by the way. Again, this is a, what, 1300 horse Merlin, judging by when this aircraft was in service. It's not one of the super powerful late war ones, but it's got some horses behind it. We're going to assume it's running 100 octane fuel. So about 1300 sounds roughly about right. Maybe 1500 as an upper bound. Yeah, there's our runway. Probably easy to approach coming from this side, but we'll come in from the other end. What is the wind doing? Because there is clearly wind. Good question. We should have checked the windsock. The EFB in this does have like a little weather check function, which is quite handy, I guess. Although you can just check METAR from the Sims weather menu anyway. We're going to switch to a tank that we know has more fuel. We've been on our reserve the whole time because I forgot to change tanks after takeoff. Bad pilot. Okay. I want to land. There is the runway. 170 for gear. I'm climbing, by the way, to check this speed. If I hold the level, it won't do it. So 170 gear. We're now holding about 155 with the gear down. Flaps are 140, and absolutely not above 150 according to the placard next to me. So we're still not slow enough to drop flaps here. Keep the runway vaguely in sight. I've actually got a little far from the airfield here. It's going to be difficult to see over the nose, so I'm going to have to lean around it. I'm not known for my forwards thinking. Or really any thinking, to be fair. You know what, we're below 150, we're about 145, that'll do it. Let's dump the flaps. The last stage kicks the nose up significantly, as I alluded to earlier. And now, finally, we're starting to wash off some speed. At idle, still, by the way, just saying. Okay, there's our runway. The P-40, according to the POH and according to general pilot testimony, tends to approach rather, like, nose flat to the horizon, so it's difficult to see the runway. The P-40 also has a fairly fast approach speed. I'm actually getting slow here. It wants to be about 110, 115 mile an hour. So we will drop the nose a little, which will help us see our runway right there in front of us. I don't want to pick up too much speed, which I almost certainly will if I keep this up. We're high, we're fast. Give her a bit of forward slip. Well, she slips okay, I guess. I haven't checked what the variable for that's set to. Default's usually about 0.4. This is going to be a go-round. And I just did the thing that the handbook tells you not to do, which is retract the flaps below 500 feet. We got away with it. Yeah, the default value for fuselage side area drag, it's like a coefficient or multiplier or something, is 0.4. And I know that because almost every third-party dev just leaves it at 0.4 because they don't appear to know what that number does, even though it literally says, like, fuselage lateral... was it CX lateral fuselage or something like that? Like, it's obvious, like, fuselage side area drag. You should know that. But most of them just leave it 0.4. Most aircraft, it should be up around 0.8, maybe even 1 or slightly more. And that affects your ability to forward slip, to dump speed and altitude while you're on landing approach, or, well, altitude primarily. I don't want to pick up too much here, which I've probably already done. We've also picked up a bit of speed, so now we've got to do the whole dance of bleeding it off again. Gear out, we're already well below our gear speed. We do get a bit of a nose down tendency as the gear comes out, which is good. Should be doing that. It is a little gusty. We're going to need to do a bit of a serpentine here, just to get rid of some of this extra speed and altitude while still getting below our flap speed. And keeping the runway in sight. Normally you'd want to fly a circular approach in these things anyway, so you don't lose the runway under the nose, but we can get away with it. There goes one stage of flap just to get us slowed down a little, and let's dump the rest, and there's the balloon. Okay. About 110 mile an hour. That is a pretty short runway, but I think we'll be okay. We just need to dump some more altitude, so a bit of a forward slip here. Right stick, left pedal. Widely used trick by glider pilots and bush pilots. Famously used in the Gimli glider incident. Oh, it even has the name of the town there. That's cute. Okay. We probably touched down a little slow there, but because the aircraft's stall speed is too low, we got away with it. Just kind of gently on the brakes. You don't want to slam the brakes on a tail dragger, especially a tail dragger with a very big V12 engine up front, because it's quite heavy and will flip you on your nose. Okay, I need to end this video, so I'm not going all day and not filling my hard drive. And also so you guys can actually get some kind of useful, meaningful conclusion out of all this rambling. Am I regretful of my purchase? Not really. I'm gonna be real. Even if iniBuilds were a fly-by-night developer, which they very much appear not to be, with the exception of the constant speed unit fucking up, I can fix everything that is wrong with this myself, with enough trial and error. Somebody who's already spent plenty of time fixing up third-party flight models would be able to do this in an afternoon, easily. Like, this is all easy stuff to fix. Like, literally a couple variables in a CFG file, and the plane is perfect. But again, the bugbear here is that constant speed unit. That is the actual problem. That is more complicated to fix, and I don't know how well known the mechanics of that are within the community. Like, I don't know if modders know how to fix that kind of stuff. I would guess Imenez probably does, because Imenez is part of the Fly-by-Wire modding team and has done some wonderful work with the 40th anniversary DC3. But more generally speaking, I don't know if that's within the realms of what modders can adjust to be correct. Let's get rid of the carb heat so we don't cook anything. And shut it down. you can't actually flip that, which is the nav light. Nav lights, I think running signal sounds like nav lights. You can't actually switch that off. It's a 3-position switch, but it's only got 2 positions simulated. Radio, pitot heater. Like I said, we can't do anything with the breakers anyway. Oh, I forgot to turn my generator on for that flight. That's okay, it doesn't matter, because it's not going to affect anything. Like I said, all of the effects I just showed you guys, I've tested with the aircraft hot started in the default like everything on configuration. So I have already controlled for my monkey brain for getting things in startup, and it does not affect anything. It doesn't matter. So bear that in mind. Yeah, conclusion. Any need to focus on fixing the prop. The engine's probably not bad. Like, I can't tell if the engine's correct or not while the prop's doing its own weird and wonderful things. The engine's probably not bad, so they're probably not actually wrong when they say that the engine's super well modeled. It probably is. The issue is that you could have, like, the absolute most perfect within 0.01% of error Merlin simulation, and if you've got a prop bolted to it that's behaving the wrong way, it's not going to matter. It's all going to go down the toilet anyway. So they need to fix the prop. That should be their #1 priority. As far as systems go, in fact, it's really the only system in this thing that I think does need looking at. The rest is either not important or whatever. Can be dealt with later. Should have cage up before I switched off. The flight model. Okay, the flight model. There are a couple of big things here, and then a bunch of little things. Roll is fine. I'm happy with roll. Yaw, pretty happy with yaw. In terms of, like, me kicking the rudder, not in terms of things acting upon the aircraft in yaw. We'll get to that. Pitch. The pitch inertia is way too low. Like, holy shit, it's too low. Ridiculously too low. That needs to be changed. This aircraft should not be pitching around that much. Even if the P-40 is, like the Spitfire, sensitive in pitch, you have to remember that is with a pilot using their full range of strength to fully deflect this stick with a very long stick extension. It does not mean that with my desktop stick, this amount of movement should result in the aircraft trying to backflip and or front flip and do a somersault and kill itself. So that is something that really... Okay, that was just me checking to see if the prop blades move with the power off and no pressure in the system. Yeah, that needs to be fixed. The aircraft should not be that sensitive in pitch, not that twitchy, I should say. It should probably be sensitive in pitch, but not twitchy. So it needs more inertia. It needs more feeling of weight to it in pitch. In roll, it's fine. In yaw, it's fine. It needs to act like it has an actual propeller, not a jet. I don't know if they've used, like, the prop CFD or just the airframe CFD or both. Well, I can almost certainly tell you they haven't used the prop CFD, or if they have, they've got all the coefficients and everything set way too low. Because the prop's not affecting the aircraft. Simply put, the prop is not affecting the aircraft. It's not inducing any torque roll, or at least it's such a small amount I haven't noticed it. I haven't had to use... this doesn't have aileron trim, it's only got fixed tabs, but like I haven't had to account for roll really much at all. I think there's a very, 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 very slight amount of it that I encountered at cruise power in calm air when I was flying it last night. Ooh, we beat the weather down. But yeah, like it's not affected in roll by power changes. You don't get the aircraft trying to stand on its left wheel on takeoff, which a Merlin engined aircraft will do. It'll try and put all its weight on the left wheel, which is going to aggravate its leftward swing. It's not going to have a leftward swing as it's modeled correctly because the prop slipstream is not acting on the tail at all. So a Merlin engined aircraft will try and pull left, a Griffin will try and pull right. And the reason it's doing that is because the prop wash, or the slipstream off the prop, is spiraling around the aircraft and hitting the left side of the tail, the left surface of the tail, and is pushing the tail right, which will then force the nose left, right? And that is acting in conjunction with the aircraft torque rolling to the left and putting all its weight on the left wheel, which is why when you take off in DCS in a Spitfire, you need to hold the stick slightly right in roll as well as holding right pedal, because the aircraft is going to roll up on its left wheel. So if you just counter the prop slipstream with the pedal, but you don't account for the roll, you're going to end up swinging left anyway, because as the aircraft puts its weight on the left wheel, the right wing is going to start flying, and the right wing is going to advance forwards because it doesn't have wheel friction to fight. There's nothing slowing it down, right? It's only fighting air friction. It's not fighting air and wheel friction, or ground contact friction, I should say. So, yeah, like, I get it. I get it. They don't want to scare off the Xbox players. That's totally understandable. But it's not like there's a shortage of non-functional click spots where they could have this set to. It's not like there's no EFB that they could have a checkbox option in, like Flying Iron recently did with the F6F, finally. This is all easy stuff that is very much within the bounds of what iniBuilds can do, and have done in some of their other aircraft, I believe. So I don't know why it's not present here. I don't understand it. It really should be. You're not getting a World War II fighter experience if you are not getting that. And particularly as a PC player who has like a reasonable sim setup, you know, I've got a stick, I've got pedals, I've got a throttle, I've got a button box with my little landing gear lever on it. Like, I don't want to be limited to a cartoon aircraft just because, like, some people are using Xbox controllers. And it's not even like you can't fly properly with an Xbox controller, because some of the most dangerous players on Enigma's Cold War server in DCS were flying for a very long time with 360 controllers. Like, at least give us the option, right? At least give us the option. That's the crux of it. System stuff, like, I don't care. I don't care that this isn't clickable. Like, I really don't care that I can't set up the radio exactly correctly, or that I can't use... I don't even think this has radio navigation, to be fair. What's this? Transmitter... Yeah, that's just your antenna selector. This is your radio. That's your recognition lights. A lot of modules do have that clickable. This doesn't. The only reason there's a grab handle there is because the rad lever's next to it. Like, this stuff I don't really care about. This is fine. It doesn't need to be modeled. You don't need to have, like, little, ooh, you open this and you can see the map inside, or you open it and you can put your fucking candy wrappers in it. Like, I don't care. It's nice to have, but this is a cheap module, and for the price it's sold at, yeah, like, that's unreasonable to expect. What is not unreasonable to expect is for a prop aircraft to fly like a prop aircraft, I feel. And I also, you know, feel like iniBuilds completely have it within their capability to fix this. More so, I'm at a loss as to how it's in this state in the first place. Like, if they rushed it out the door, or maybe they had a new employee working on it and this was their first project or something to kind of show them the ropes. I don't know. Because it's not like these guys don't know what they're doing. And it's odd to me that we've now had two P-40s, a P-40B and a P-40F, from two separate developers who have put out really good products in the past, including prop-driven aircraft of similar vintage. In the case of Big Radials, that is their whole thing, is prop-driven aircraft. And yet, neither of the P-40s we currently have behaves like a P-40. The Big Radials one won't stall properly, and this one, it doesn't behave like it even has a prop. So I don't know why that is. It's very odd. And we've got a third P-40 on the way, a dev that I've never heard of before, probably because I'm from a combat sim background, is releasing a P-40N. So basically same, but with a little bit more power, pretty much. I'm curious how that one's going to turn out. I will let somebody else dip their toes into that and test the waters, because I have spent enough money on P-40s that are going to become weekend fix-up projects at this point, to be perfectly honest with you. But again, iniBuilds are, reputable devs. They're not likely to just dump this and run, and I'm hoping that they can correct some of these behaviors. However, I do kind of cringe slightly. I'm going to be honest about it. I do sort of cringe slightly when I see developers throwing around that we spoke to real pilots, and then the aircraft literally is not making enough RPM to even take off. Like, I don't know about that one, Chief. I don't know about that one. Is it worth the money? Not yet. Hold off. I'm going to say that like outright. It could very easily be worth the money if they even just fix the prop. Like, literally, even if they just fix the prop, you can then buy it and then wait for a modder to put out a fix for the flight model stuff, even if ini doesn't, which they probably will at some point, I hope. I should bloody well hope. So yeah, like, if the prop stuff was fixed, the price of admission becomes okay for everything else, because everything else that's wrong with this is easily fixable. Like, really, really easily fixable. So yeah, there you go. That's my air quotes review of the iniBuilds P-40F. Like I said, do I regret buying it? Not really. I'm just annoyed. It's a can we fix it? Yes. Should we have to? No. Situation. But we'll see where it goes in the future, and I hope that iniBuilds are able to get it where it should be, and get it up there with their other products as being an instant recommend, because a lot of their other products are instant recommends, which is why I'm so confused about this one. And before I can find an excuse to extend this video for another half hour, thank you all very much for watching. I hope this was helpful to some of you guys, and before anyone gets too carried away with the, you just said you've never flown a Warbird, ooh, you're a low hours pilot, I bet you've, like, fuck off, dude. Like, I can read a pilot's operating handbook. It's not difficult. I really have no patience for the kind of dogpiling the MSFS community has been engaging in anytime somebody brings up a legitimate concern. It's counterproductive, it's anti-intellectual, it's just shit. It's the kind of stuff that I've become very jaded with the DCS community about, and the MSFS community's apparently even worse with it. Actually, one last thing. Nope. I stand corrected. The coolant temp is pegged at about 115, 120. So yeah, that gauge is not functional at the moment, it seems. So you can add that to the list of things that need fixing, but whatever, it's not that big a deal, I guess. You know, if you're running your engine hot enough that you really need this to be working, then you probably haven't read the pilot's operating handbook. Thank you all for watching, guys. I hope this has been helpful and illuminating, and best of luck to iniBuilds on finishing off this product, which, again, to be fair, they have said was still not finished at release, and in their future endeavors, which will hopefully have options to handle more like props on the ground. See ya.